Chapter 12. The Love Bomb. Ben had spent the whole of Sunday morning being measured up by Mum for his dance outfit. She had stayed up through the night sketching possible designs. Under duress, he was forced to choose one, and pointed a limp finger at the one that he thought was the least hideous. Mum's hand-drawn options ranged all the way from the embarrassing to the humiliating. There was the woodland, fruit cocktail, thunder and lightning, accident and emergency, ice and a slice, the hedgerow and badger, the quality street, eggs and bacon, confetti, the underwater world, burning love, cheese and pickle, the solar system, piano man. But the one that Ben thought was the least worst was the love bomb. "We will have to find you a nice young girl to partner with for the competition," said Mum excitedly as she accidentally ran one of her fake nails under the sewing machine and it exploded. Ben hadn't thought about dance partners. Not only was he going to have to dance, he was going to have to dance with a girl. And not just any girl, but a revoltingly precious, precocious, sparkly, fake-tanned, leotard-wearing, over-made-up one. Ben was still at the age where he thought girls were as appealing as frog spawn. "Oh, I'm just going to dance on my own," he spluttered. "A solo piece?" exclaimed Mum. "How original!" "In fact, I can't stand here talking all day. I'd better go and practice," said Ben, as he disappeared upstairs to his room. He shut the door, turned on his radio, and then climbed out of the window and raced over to Granny's bungalow on his bike. "So, you were running off into the woods when Lord Davenport started shooting at you?" Ben was eagerly prompting his Granny, but for the moment her mind looked blank. "Was I?" said Granny, looking increasingly befuddled. "That's where the story ended last night. You said you'd snatched the ring from the Davenport's bedroom and were running across the lawn when you heard shots." "Oh, yes, yes," muttered Granny, her face suddenly illuminated. Ben smiled broadly. He suddenly remembered how he used to love his Granny telling him stories when he was younger, transporting him to a magical world, a world where you paint pictures in your mind that are more thrilling than all the movies and TV shows or video games in the universe. Only a couple of weeks ago, he had pretended to be asleep to stop her telling him a bedtime story. Clearly, he'd forgotten how thrilling stories could be. "I was running and running," continued Granny breathlessly, as if she was actually running, "and I heard a shot ring out. Then another. I knew from the sound that it was definitely a shotgun rather than a rifle." "What's the difference?" asked Ben. "Well, a rifle shoots one bullet and is more accurate, but a shotgun sprays hundreds of little deadly balls of lead. Any idiot can hit you if they fire a shotgun in your direction." "And did he?" said Ben. His smile had faded now. He was genuinely worried. "Yes, but luckily I was far away by then, so I was only grazed. I could hear the dogs barking too. They were hunting me, and I was only a small girl. If they'd caught me, the hounds would have ripped me to shreds." Ben gasped in horror. "So how did you get away?" he asked. "I took a chance. I couldn't outrun the dogs through the forest. The fastest runner in the world couldn't, but I knew the woods really well. I used to play in them for hours with my brothers and sisters. I knew if I could just get across the stream, then the dogs would lose my scent." "How come?" "Dogs can't follow a scent across water. And there was a great oak tree just on the other side of the stream. If I climbed that tree, I might be safe." Ben couldn't imagine his Granny climbing stairs, let alone a tree. She'd lived in the bungalow ever since he could remember. "More shots rang out through the darkness, and I ran towards the stream," continued the old lady, "and I stumbled in the gloom of the forest. I tripped on a tree root and fell face first in the mud. Scrambling to my feet, I turned around to see an army of men on horseback, led by Lord Davenport. They were carrying flaming torches and holding shotguns. The whole forest was lit up with the fire from the torches. I jumped into the stream. It was around this time of year, in the depth of winter, and the water was icy. The cold shocked me and I could hardly breathe. I clapped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. I could hear the dogs getting nearer and nearer, barking and barking. There must have been dozens of them. I looked behind me and I could see their sharp teeth gleaming in the moonlight. So I waded across the stream and started climbing the tree. My hands were muddy and my legs and feet were wet, and I kept slipping down the trunk. I frantically rubbed my hands on my nightshirt and began to climb again. I scrambled to the very top of the tree and stayed as still as I could. I heard the dogs and the army of Davenport's men follow the stream down to a different part of the forest. The dogs' ferocious barks became distant, and after a while the torches were just specks in the distance. I was safe. I shivered up in that tree for hours. I waited until dawn, slid down the tree, and made my way back to our cottage. I crept into bed and lay there for a few moments before the sun rose. Ben could picture everything she described perfectly in his mind. Granny had him utterly spellbound. "Did they come looking for you?" he asked. "Well, no one got a good enough look at me, so Davenport had his men search everywhere in the village. Every cottage was turned upside down to look for the ring." "Didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to. I felt so guilty, but I knew if I owned up, I would be in deep trouble. Lord Davenport would have me publicly flogged in the village square." "So what did you do?" "I swallowed it." Ben couldn't believe his ears. "The ring, Granny? You swallowed the ring?" "I thought it was the best way to hide it. In my stomach. A few days later it came out when I went to the toilet." "That must have been painful," said Ben, his bum wincing at the thought. Passing a big diamond ring out of his bottom didn't sound in any way enjoyable. "It was painful. Excruciating, in fact," Granny grimaced. "The only good thing was that our cottage had been searched already, from top to bottom. Not my bottom. The bottom of the cottage, I mean," Ben chuckled. "And Davenport's men had moved on to searching the next village. So one night I went off to the woods and hid the ring. I placed it where no one would ever look, under a rock in the stream." "Clever," said Ben. "But that ring was only the first of many, Ben. Stealing had been the biggest thrill of my life, and as I lay in bed each night, all I dreamed about was stealing more and more diamonds. That ring was just the beginning," continued Granny in a low whisper, staring deep into Ben's innocent eyes, "of a lifetime of crime." Chapter 13. A Lifetime of Crime. Hours passed, in what seemed like minutes, as Granny told her grandson how she'd stolen every one of the dazzling items spread out on the living room floor. The huge tiara had belonged to the wife of the President of the United States of America, the First Lady. Granny told Ben how over 50 years earlier she'd sailed all the way to America on a cruise liner to steal it from the White House in Washington, and that while sailing back home she robbed every rich lady on the ship of her jewels. How she was caught red-handed by the captain of the ship and escaped by diving overboard and swimming the last few miles of the Atlantic Ocean back to England with all of the jewellery hidden in her knickers. Granny told Ben that the sparkling emerald earrings that had been in her bungalow for decades were worth over £1 million each. They had once belonged to the wife of an enormously wealthy Indian Maharaja, a Maharani. The old lady recounted how she enlisted the help of a herd of elephants to steal them. She coaxed the elephants to stand on top of each other to form a giant ladder so she could scale the wall of the fort in India where the earrings were kept in the royal bedchamber. The most amazing tale of all was of how she stole the enormous deep blue diamond and sapphire brooch that sat sparkling on her worn living room carpet. She told Ben that it had once belonged to the last Empress of Russia, who ruled with her husband the Tsar before the Communist Revolution of 1917. It had for many years been under bulletproof glass at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year by a platoon of fearsome Russian soldiers. This theft had required the most elaborate plan of all. Granny had hidden in an ancient suit of armour in the museum, which dated back hundreds of years to the time of Catherine the Great. Each time the soldiers looked the other way, she would edge forward in the metal suit a few millimetres until she got close enough to the brooch. It took her a week. "What, like Granny's footsteps?" asked Ben. "Exactly, young man," she replied. "Then I smashed the glass with the silver axe I was holding and grabbed the brooch." "How did you escape, Granny?" "That's a good question. Now, how did I escape?" Granny looked flummoxed. "Sorry, it's my age, boy. I forget things." Ben smiled supportively. "That's okay, Granny." Soon the old lady's memory seemed to come back into focus. "Oh, yes, I remember," she continued. I ran outside into the courtyard of the museum, leapt into the barrel of a huge cannon, and then fired myself to safety." Ben pictured this for a moment. His granny in deepest, darkest Russia, flying through the air in an ancient suit of armour. It was hard to believe, but how else could this little old lady come to have such an astonishing collection of priceless gems? Ben loved Granny's daring tales. At home, Ben had never had stories read or told to him. His parents always just switched on the television and slumped down on the sofa when they got home from work. Hearing the old lady talk was so exciting. Ben wished he could move in with her. He could listen to Granny all day. "There can't be a jewel in the world you haven't stolen," said Ben. "Oh, yes, there is, young man. Hang on, what's that?" "What's what?" said Ben. Granny was pointing behind Ben's head, an expression of horror on her face. It's what?" said Ben, not daring to turn around to see what she was pointing at. A shiver ran down his spine. "Whatever you do," said Granny, "don't turn around."